Life can change in an instant, turning laughter into tears and mockery into profound lessons. Nestor, a seemingly happy and complacent young man, had no idea that his world was about to be turned upside down. That unexpected encounter with a homeless man was not just a trivial episode. It was the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything he believed about himself and what truly matters in life. When Nestor mocked the man lying on the sidewalk, he had no idea that this fragile figure held secrets that would change his destiny. As the revelations about the man's past unfold, Nestor finds himself facing his own choices and the emptiness created by his superficial life. What seemed like a mere moment of laughter transforms into a painful awakening, leading Nestor to question, what if that man were his father? The pain of discovery can be overwhelming, but it is also the first step toward transformation. Nestor learns that true wealth is not measured in material possessions, but in the genuine connections we make. This is the story of how he found his path to redemption and true happiness alongside someone he had long ignored. Join us on this inspiring journey of self-discovery and compassion, where every tear can become a seed of change and every choice an opportunity to rebuild. If you haven't subscribed yet, take a moment to do so now. At 22 years old, Nestor had the life many young people dream of. He lived in a comfortable apartment in the city center, wore designer clothes, and was always surrounded by friends who shared his fast-paced and superficial lifestyle. That afternoon he was walking through the bustling streets, laughing loudly as he always did with his friends, all distracted by trivial conversations and the glow of their phones. They were on their way to yet another party, where luxury and ostentation were the center of attention. As they turned a corner, Nestor noticed something that caught his eye. A man lying on the sidewalk. He wore dirty, torn clothes, so worn that it was hard to distinguish their original color. His unkempt hair fell over his face, and the man hunched over, as if the weight of the world had been placed on his shoulders. He barely moved, appearing oblivious to the hustle and bustle of the city around him. With a mocking look and a posture that suggested superiority, Nestor slowed down. He gestured for his friends to stop and, laughing, remarked loudly for everyone to hear, "Look at this. A homeless guy lying in the middle of the street. Looks like he decided to take a nap right here. What a comfortable life, huh?" His friends laughed as they always did when Nestor made jokes, unaware of how hurtful that could be. It was easy to laugh, easy to feel superior while looking down at someone who had nothing. Nestor continued, reveling in the situation, mimicking the homeless man in a caricatured way, lying on the ground and putting on a show, while his friends took pictures and videos to share on social media. But amid the mockery, something happened. The man, who until then seemed oblivious to everything, slowly lifted his head. His heavy, tired eyes met Nestor's. There was no anger in his gaze nor resentment, only a disconcerting calm. With a hoarse, low voice, the homeless man murmured something that made Nestor's laughter vanish into thin air. "Not everything that seems is." Silence hung in the air for a moment. Still kneeling on the ground, Nestor felt an unexpected discomfort grow within him. It wasn't fear but a strange sensation, as if those words carried a deeper meaning, something he couldn't immediately grasp. His friends, still laughing, pulled him back to reality, and he, trying to disguise his discomfort, quickly got up and resumed laughing, though it felt forced. As they continued on their way, Nestor couldn't shake off those words. Not everything that seems is. What did the homeless man mean by that? Why had those words, spoken so simply, disturbed him so much? He looked back, seeing the figure of the man once again lying on the sidewalk, as if the world around him had no impact whatsoever. "Come on, man," one of his friends said, tugging at his shirt. "Forget it. It was just a joke." Nestor forced a smile and kept walking, but something inside him had changed. What he didn't know was that this unexpected encounter would be the beginning of a journey that would change his life forever. And, even without realizing it, Nestor was already taking the first steps toward the truth that the homeless man represented. Nestor still felt the vibrations of his friends' laughter around him, but inside, something was beginning to change. He couldn't forget the homeless man's gaze. There was something different about that man, something that didn't match his humble and dirty appearance. The discomfort grew within Nestor, but he pushed it to the back of his mind, refusing to think about it any further. As they walked, His friends chatted about the party they would be attending later, but Nestor remained quieter than usual. The homeless man's phrase echoed in his mind like an insistent refrain. Not everything that seems is. He tried to understand what it meant. Was it just a meaningless phrase, spoken by a man living on the streets? Or was there something deeper behind those words? As Nestor distanced himself from the scene, he forced a smile and tried to engage in the flow of conversation. Yet the truth was that he couldn't stop thinking. It wasn't common for something to leave him so unsettled. He had always been a confident person, used to being the center of attention, but that day he felt challenged by a man who in everyone's eyes had nothing to offer. As the day progressed, Nestor began to wonder if the discomfort he felt was a reflection of something deeper. Perhaps deep down he knew that his life, filled with superficialities, did not fulfill him as it should. But he still wasn't ready to admit that. In any case, the idea that the beggar might see something in him that he himself did not was disconcerting. His friend's conversation continued light and carefree, but Nestor, even unwillingly, felt different. Something inside him began to stir, a spark of doubt that he didn't know how to extinguish. This feeling would accompany him for days, but he would only begin to understand what it meant after an unexpected encounter that would force him to confront not only his actions but the past he had buried long ago. As Nestor walked the streets on his way home, still filled with thoughts about the beggar and the enigmatic words he had heard, he barely noticed when he passed a bustling cafe. However, before he could distance himself, a familiar voice called out to him. "Nestor? Is that you?" He stopped immediately, looking around until his eyes met those of Karina, an old childhood friend. She had been an important part of his life, but they had drifted apart after Karina moved to another city. The surprise was instant, and for a moment, they both stood still, processing the unexpected reunion. "Karina?" Nestor said, smiling in surprise. "Long time no see." They embraced, exchanging those quick first words that two people who had been apart usually share. "How have you been? What have you been up to? What's new?" Soon, they decided to sit on one of the benches in the nearby square to continue the conversation. "I was just passing through," Karina explained. "But you know how it is, sometimes things bring us back to where we started." Nestor agreed, and the conversation quickly shifted to memories of the past, people they both knew, and the paths their lives had taken. Karina seemed calm, but there was something in her expression that indicated she wanted to talk about something more serious. "You know, Nestor, there's a story I remembered the other day. You might be interested." She looked at him cautiously. "Do you remember a magnate, a very powerful man, who disappeared a few years ago? At the time it was a scandal." Nestor frowned, trying to dig through his memory for any clues about the story Karina was mentioning. He couldn't connect the details. "I'm not sure I recall. What happened to him?" Karina crossed her legs and leaned slightly forward, as if she were about to share a secret. "He disappeared mysteriously. He was very wealthy, owned businesses, lived at the top of the world. And then poof, he vanished. Some said he fled, others said he was kidnapped. But they never found the body, and after a while, he was declared dead." She paused, as if contemplating whether to continue. "That man was your father, Nestor." Karina's words struck Nestor like an unexpected blow. He looked at her, incredulous, feeling as though the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. His father? The missing magnate? Memories of his childhood came rushing back. His father had been a distant figure, but he never really knew what had happened to him. His mother said little, just that he had vanished and that life had to move on. "My father?" Nestor whispered, trying to process what he had just heard. "How do you know this?" Karina sighed and lowered her eyes. "My family has always been involved in business, Nestor. I heard conversations, I heard rumors. I didn't want to tell you this before because I thought it wasn't my place. But now seeing you, I think it might be time for you to know the truth." Nestor fell silent, Karina's words echoing in his mind. He had never known the true story of his father. He only remembered vague fragments of a man always busy, always rushing from one meeting to another, until the day he simply didn't come back. Karina's revelation made Nestor feel small, as if he were gazing at a part of his life that had always been there, but that he had never wanted to confront. His missing father. A magnate. someone with so much power who vanished without a trace. Now the encounter with the beggar and that enigmatic phrase, "Not everything that seems is," made even less sense to him. Or perhaps it was beginning to make perfect sense. Karina's revelation wouldn't leave Nestor's mind. He wondered how he had lived all those years without ever truly questioning his father's disappearance. After that conversation, something awakened within him, an insatiable curiosity mixed with a sense of loss and unresolved past. That very night, when he got home, Nestor flopped onto the sofa, but sleep wouldn't come. The only thing occupying his mind was, what if my father is really alive? Here's the translated text, adapted for an English-speaking audience. Driven by this restlessness, he decided to investigate. He grabbed his laptop and began searching online for any news about the disappearance of the magnate, his father, who was both powerful and mysterious. At first, all he found were the usual reports that his mother had already mentioned. The sudden disappearance, the investigations that led nowhere, and finally, the official declaration that he had been declared dead. However, the deeper Nestor dug, the stranger the details became. In old newspaper and magazine archives, he began to find references to conspiracy theories he had never heard of before. A persistent rumor suggested that his father had not disappeared for no reason, but that he had chosen to vanish, abandoning his empire and luxurious lifestyle. Some claimed he did this as an act of protest, a personal revolt against the corrupt system he was involved in. Apparently, he had become disenchanted with the materialistic values and the world of greed surrounding him. Nestor read with wide eyes, not fully believing what he was discovering. The idea that his father, a man he always imagined to be cold and calculating, could have abandoned everything to live such a simple life seemed impossible. Yet, at the same time, there was something inside him that made this theory strangely plausible. Then he found the most disturbing clue of all. Rumors that the magnate was alive, wandering the streets of the city, disguised as a homeless man. A shock coursed through Nestor's body. He immediately recalled the man who had mocked him earlier that same day. Could it be true? Could that mysterious beggar be his own father? The thought seemed absurd, yet the coincidence of the words, "Not everything that seems is," now sounded almost prophetic. It was as if that encounter had not been by chance, but something destined to happen. Nestor's research led him to sleepless nights, with page after page of articles, old interviews and theories scattered across obscure internet forums. He discovered that before disappearing, his father had been involved in a series of businesses that to many seemed dishonest. But there was a twist in the story that almost no one knew. He had begun to question his own actions and those of the elite he associated with. It was then that he seemingly made the decision to disappear, rejecting everything he had built. Nestor wondered how he had never known this before. He had grown up surrounded by comfort, never doubting the lifestyle his family led. But now, with these discoveries, he found himself confronted with a reality completely different from the one he knew. The more he read, the more he questioned whether he truly knew the man who had been his father. It was as if his entire life had been built on a shadow, an incomplete story that was finally beginning to make sense. But this new understanding only raised more questions. Why hadn't his father sought him out? What truly motivated him to abandon everything? And above all, where was he now? Determined to follow every lead. Nestor knew that his journey was only beginning. Nestor couldn't shake the idea that the beggar, the dirty, weary-looking man, could be his father. The more he tried to dismiss this possibility as absurd, the more his mind insisted on returning to the same conclusion. The beggar's enigmatic words, the way he looked at him. There was something there that Nestor couldn't ignore. In the days that followed, he mentally revisited that brief encounter. He desperately tried to remember the details of the man's face, the expression in his eyes. But everything seemed blurred. Time had distorted his memory, and now Nestor wondered if he had really paid enough attention at that moment. His friends laughed and made jokes, but what about him? He had been far more concerned with maintaining his facade, appearing superior. Had he, without realizing it, come face to face with his own father? This doubt began to consume Nestor. The thought that he had mocked someone so important, and moreover someone who could be his own father, was a wound that opened wider each day. He found himself thinking constantly about the beggar, about the firm gaze that had thrown him off balance, the gaze of someone who seemed to understand more than he let on. Nestor became obsessed with the idea of finding that man again. He knew that if he didn't, he would never find peace. The possibility that the beggar was indeed his father pressed down on him like a constant shadow. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the dirty face, the torn clothes, and he wondered, what if it was him? In the following days, Nestor began to walk the streets more often where he had encountered the beggar. He spent hours wandering around, observing every figure sitting on the sidewalks, tirelessly searching for any clue that would lead him back to the man. His heart raced every time he spotted someone in similar conditions, but as he got closer, he realized it wasn't the same man. As the search intensified, Nestor also distanced himself from his friends. The easy laughter and jokes that once seemed amusing now irritated him. They did not comprehend the depth of the situation. They did not know the weight of what he carried. He tried to explain to Karina, who already knew the story of his father, but even she seemed skeptical. Nestor, this might just be a coincidence, she said one day, trying to calm him. Maybe you're just seeing what you want to see. But Nestor could no longer ignore the signs. Every step he took, every corner he turned, seemed to pull him deeper into his obsession. He could not shake the idea that if that man really was his father, he needed to do something. He needed to correct the mistake he made. He needed to look that man in the eyes again and ask, bluntly, if he was who Nestor thought he was. With each passing day, the city felt more oppressive. The streets stretched longer, and the answers felt further away. Doubt gnawed at him from within, transforming his days into an endless search. Nestor knew that somehow this quest was connected to something greater. More than just finding out if the homeless man was his father, he felt he was on a journey to reconnect with his own identity. After days of relentless searching, Nestor finally spotted the man who troubled him so much. The same homeless man on the same corner, sitting on the ground with eyes lost on the horizon, as if time around him did not matter. Nestor's heart raced, but this time, something within him had changed. Gone was the arrogant, self-absorbed young man who made jokes about those living on the streets. The person approaching that man was now marked by doubt, guilt, and above all, a need for answers. Nestor hesitated for a moment, watching the homeless man from a distance. Thoughts raced through his mind. What if he was wrong? What if this man was just another lost soul wandering the streets, with no connection to his past? But something inside him, a quiet certainty, pushed him forward. He could no longer avoid the truth, no matter how painful it might be. He needed to know. Taking a deep breath, Nestor took his final steps toward the man. This time there were no laughs, no friends by his side to boost his ego. He was alone, face to face with the possibility that this man might be his own father. He stopped in front of the homeless man, who did not seem surprised by his presence. On the contrary, he raised his gaze calmly, as if he had been waiting for that moment. Nestor, with his voice choked by anxiety, slowly crouched down to the man's level. The silence between them was almost palpable, as if the world around them had been silenced for that encounter. He did not know exactly how to start, but finally, the words that had tormented him escaped from his mouth. "Are you my father?" The homeless man, with a faint smile on his face, kept his gaze fixed on Nestor's. There was no shock or surprise in his expression. There was only a profound calmness, almost inexplicable. He did not immediately confirm, and for a moment, Nestor felt the weight of uncertainty intensify. But the man's smile somehow brought a subtle relief, as if the answer were much more complex than a simple yes or no. "Before I answer," said the man in a hoarse but firm voice, "let me tell you a story." Nestor, anxious yet fascinated, leaned in a bit closer, attentive to every word. The homeless man began to speak about a man who many years ago lived surrounded by wealth, power, and influence. He had everything the material world could offer: a luxurious house, expensive cars, thriving businesses. But inside, this man was empty. Despite having what many called success, he knew something was profoundly wrong. He saw the corruption around him, the homeless man continued, the greed, the lies. And in the end, he realized that true wealth was not something money could buy. The weight of his decisions, the impact he had on the world and on others' lives, began to suffocate him. Then one day this man made a radical decision. He left everything behind. Nestor listened intently, feeling each word as if it were being spoken directly to him, as if that story had been rooted in his life without him knowing. The homeless man went on talking about difficult choices, sacrifices, and how the material world, as seductive as it was, could not fill the void of a spirit-seeking truth. He decided that he would only find peace, said the homeless man, when he detached himself from everything that bound him to a life that no longer made sense. And so, he chose to live in simplicity, among those who had nothing but possessed everything. Nestor began to understand the depth of that story. The homeless man's words were not merely a fable, they were a mirror of his own father's life and perhaps of his own as well. He was facing a truth that neither rumors nor investigations could reveal. It was something that could only be understood through living and feeling. And in that moment, Nestor knew he was closer than ever to discovering the truth. The homeless man finished his story, letting the silence fill the air once again. Nestor, with his heart racing, finally asked, "But was it you?" The man smiled again, a smile full of compassion and understanding, but his response did not come in simple words. The silence that followed the homeless man's smile felt endless, and Nestor could sense the weight of the words that were about to come. He didn't know if he was ready to hear the truth, but something inside him urged him to continue, to seek the answer that had tormented him for so long. Finally, the man spoke. His voice was calm, yet laden with an intensity that made Nestor shiver. "Yes, I am your father," he said straightforwardly. Nestor's world stopped in that moment. He had always imagined various possibilities, but hearing those words come from the mouth of the man before him was like an avalanche of emotions. Shock, sadness, anger, and relief swirled in his mind, making it difficult to even breathe. "But why?" Nestor managed to ask, his voice trembling. "Why did you do this? Why did you choose to live this way, abandoning everything including me?" The homeless man, his father, looked directly into Nestor's eyes. His expression was serene, but his eyes reflected the weight of years of pain and reflection. He paused, as if choosing his words carefully. "I did not abandon you," he began. "I abandoned a life that was killing me inside. I was consumed by money, by power, by the lies that the material world tells us. I thought I was happy, that I was building something for the future. For you. But in the end all of that was empty." Nestor listened attentively, trying to absorb every word. He vaguely remembered his father as a powerful man, always surrounded by important people, always busy, but also always distant. Even in his childhood, Nestor had never truly felt his father's presence, as if he were perpetually distracted by greater, more important things. "I saw that true wealth was not what I had accumulated," his father continued. "It wasn't possessions, nor businesses, nor power. True wealth lies in the connections we make with others, in love, in compassion, in simplicity, and most importantly, in knowing who we are without all the masks that the world forces us to wear." Nestor felt a tightening in his chest. He had grown up believing that success was everything, that money and power defined a person's worth. His father, the man he had always admired from afar, had willingly abandoned all of that to live on the streets. He had done so to teach a lesson that, until that moment, Nestor would never have understood. "I knew that for you to understand, I could not continue living that lie," the father explained. "I needed to show you in a way that left no doubts, that the life I built was a prison, and that true freedom only comes when you break free from the invisible chains that bind us to materialism." His father's words hit Nestor like a blow. He who had spent so much time looking down on those living on the streets, judging their worth by their appearance and lack of possessions, now saw his own father becoming the symbol of everything he had ignored. The lesson was clear and painful. "And was that why you left me?" Nestor asked, now with tears in his eyes, his voice breaking under the weight of everything he had heard. "That was why I had to leave," said his father, his voice gentle. "Because I knew that if I stayed by your side in that world, not only would I lose myself even more, but you would too. I wanted you to understand that a person's worth is not in what they own, but in who they are, in what they offer to others, in the connections they make." Nestor felt a knot form in his throat. Tears now flowed freely down his face. He finally understood the sacrifice his father had made, the depth of his decision. For so long he had taken pride in his life, in his material achievements, and had never realized how superficial all of that was. He, like his father, had fallen into the trap of believing that the outside world was the key to happiness. "I wanted you to see what I saw," his father continued, "that happiness is not in money or power, but in the small things, in sincere connections, in the peace that comes from within." Nestor, shaken, now looked at his father not as a stranger, but as someone who had sacrificed himself to give him a lesson he wouldn't have learned otherwise. And in that moment, he knew he would never see the world the same way again. The homeless man, his father, reached out his hand to Nestor, and this time without hesitation he took it. There was no more anger, no resentment, just understanding and a deep desire to rebuild that relationship, now based on something much more genuine. Nestor knew that his life would never be the same, but for the first time in years, he felt he was on the right path. With the revelation he had just received, Nestor felt that his life was at a turning point. The image of his father, the homeless man he had mocked, lingered in his mind. It was as if all his past actions followed him like shadows, reminding him of who he was and what he had become. The weight of regret transformed into a powerful impetus, an inner force that pushed him to seek meaningful change. In the days that followed, Nestor made a decision that would change his destiny. He would dedicate his life to helping those in need. The idea emerged slowly, but soon it became a burning flame in his heart. He began to visit shelter after shelter, always bringing food and clothes he no longer used. Each smile he received in return, each word of gratitude, warmed his heart as if a new purpose was being born within him. The first time he entered a shelter was a revelatory moment. The smell of home-cooked food and the lively conversations among the residents filled the space. Nestor, initially nervous, was welcomed by a group of people who, despite their difficult circumstances, radiated a contagious energy. He started to listen to their stories, tales of lives that had once been full of dreams and hopes, now transformed by adversity. What had once been nameless faces became friends, human beings with their own struggles and victories. He remembered his father's words, "Not everything that seems to be is." These words echoed in his mind as he listened intently. Many of those present were not just victims of circumstances but warriors facing their daily battles. Nestor realized that the true wealth of life was not measured by what one possessed, but by the experiences and connections made along the way. As the months passed, Nestor began to engage in projects that promoted the inclusion and dignity of homeless people. He organized food and clothing drives and worked with other volunteers to create awareness events about life on the streets. He also started giving talks at his old school, sharing his journey and the lesson he learned from his father. He wanted other young people to understand that, often what we see does not tell the true story. Nestor's transformation was not limited to simply helping others. He was, in fact, rediscovering himself. He began to shed the armor he had built over the years. The arrogant and superficial young man was giving way to a more conscious, empathetic, and generous man. Each interaction made him stronger, more determined to make a difference in people's lives. There were days when he still felt lost, when the weight of the past overwhelmed him. In those moments he remembered his father's gaze, the look that had challenged him to see beyond the surface. He allowed himself to feel the pain, but he did not let it dominate him. Instead, he transformed it into fuel to continue his work. One day, while organizing a new donation, Nestor encountered an old childhood friend, Miguel, who had fallen on hard times and was now homeless. The surprise and pain of the reunion hit him like a punch in the stomach. He had never imagined that Miguel, a person so full of life and dreams, could end up like this. But instead of looking away or making jokes, Nestor approached him and offered help. "Miguel, I am here for you. Let's find a way to help you," he said, with sincerity in his eyes. The words that came from his mouth were a reflection of his transformation. He was not only helping himself but also becoming a beacon of hope for those in need. And as he looked into Miguel's face, he understood that his journey was just beginning. The road ahead would be long, full of challenges, but now he was ready to face them with a new purpose. With renewed determination, Nestor knew that true change would not come solely from his individual efforts, but from creating a united community that valued human relationships and compassion. And so he moved forward, always carrying his father's words with him, like a mantra that would guide him in his mission to help others while finding true wealth in his own life. Nestor's relationship with his father, after their reunion, was marked by a profound emotional and spiritual transformation for both of them. After the revelation that the beggar was, in fact, his father, their relationship began to rebuild on completely new foundations, built on mutual understanding and the quest for redemption. In the early days, Nestor was still in shock. He had so many questions, so many things he wanted to know about his father's life, about his choices, about what had truly led him to leave everything behind. But at the same time, there was a new vulnerability in the air. Both were in a place of insecurity, struggling to reconnect and rebuild a relationship that had been abruptly interrupted. Nestor's father, who was now named Alberto, was willing to share his journey. He began to tell stories about his life before he disappeared, recalling moments that led him to reject the material world. Alberto spoke of his frustrations with corruption, the pressure to fit into a model of success that never felt right for him. His words were always accompanied by a calm wisdom, as if he had learned to observe the world in a way that few could. The afternoons they spent together became a true ritual. Nestor would sit beside Alberto, on the same bench where he had first found him. Their conversations began to flow, not just about the past but also about dreams, fears, and hopes for the future. Alberto encouraged Nestor to stay true to himself, not to be swayed by the standards imposed by society. He shared his vision of life, emphasizing that true happiness did not come from possessions, but from the experiences and connections we make along the way. Nestor in turn became a dedicated learner. With each meeting he not only absorbed his father's life lessons, but also shared his own experiences. He spoke about the changes he was making, about his work in shelters, and his new mission to help others. Alberto listened intently, and Nestor felt more confident each day, knowing he was making a difference in the lives of others. As the days turned into weeks, the dynamic between father and son grew stronger. Alberto began to assist Nestor in his initiatives, sharing his insights about what was truly needed on the streets and how to approach people with empathy. He brought a new perspective on helping others, emphasizing the importance of not only giving, but also listening and understanding the needs of others. Over time, Nestor realized that his father was not just a man who had lost his way but someone with a unique perspective on the world, who for his own reasons had chosen a different path. He understood that Alberto was not just teaching lessons but also seeking redemption, looking for a greater purpose in his life by reconnecting with his son and engaging once more with the world. Their relationship became a journey of healing for both. Nestor grappled with his past of arrogance and superficiality, while Alberto found joy in the simple things of everyday life, like sharing a cup of coffee or having a conversation about life. Together, they began to plan community actions, involving more people and creating a space for dialogue and support for the homeless in the city. However, not everything was easy. There were days when the ghosts of the past returned to haunt them. Nestor still struggled with regret over his previous actions, and Alberto faced his insecurities about being a father again. But instead of pulling away from each other, they learned to support one another, facing difficulties together. The bond that formed between Nestor and Alberto was something rare and precious. They were both on a path of self-discovery and transformation. Through pain and love, they not only discovered the meaning of family, but also the power of empathy and understanding. Nestor knew his journey was just beginning, but now, alongside his father, he felt stronger and more capable of facing the world, ready to make a difference together. As the days passed, Nestor and Alberto became a living example of transformation and resilience. The young man, once immersed in a superficial life, now saw himself as an agent of change, dedicated to impacting the lives of those who, like his father, had been forgotten by society. With each act of kindness and every shared conversation, he not only honored his father's legacy, but also reclaimed the very essence of what it meant to be human. Their relationship was not merely a reconciliation. It was a new journey of mutual learning. Alberto, with the wisdom he had gained over the years, taught Nestor the importance of compassion and love for others, while the young man inspired his father to believe once more in hope and the possibility of a better future. Together, they faced the daily challenges, forming an unbreakable bond that transcended the past. Nestor learned that true wealth lies in the connections we create and the impact we have on the lives of others. The city, which once seemed like an indifferent place, now pulsed with the energy of people united by a greater purpose. With his father's help, he organized community events, collecting food, clothing, and providing emotional support for those in vulnerable situations. Each smile they received in return reinforced their determination. Reflecting on his journey, Nestor realized he was not only changing the lives of others, but also his own. The young man who once mocked a person on the streets now walked beside his father, transforming their wounds into strength and their pain into hope. They had become beacons of light amid the darkness, proving that change is possible, even in the most challenging circumstances. And so, at the end of this moving story, we invite you, who have followed this journey, to reflect on the importance of empathy and solidarity in our lives. How about joining Nestor and Alberto in their mission to transform the world around you? If this narrative touched your heart, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories like this. Together, we can make a difference and spread the message of love and compassion.